He had always been a man of decisions, powerful, sharp, and respected across continents. He built his life on rules, logic, and precision. From early mornings in tall glass towers to late nights surrounded by endless reports, his days were measured by results. There was a rhythm to his life, and it was one that never faltered. Friends, employees, even family, all knew him as someone whose word was final. Once he made a choice, it was done. There was no reconsidering, no second thoughts. Emotions were distractions, and distractions were dangerous. This mindset had taken him far, but it also left parts of him untouched. Buried beneath wealth and discipline, he had always believed that power was a shield against the unexpected. He traveled across countries in private jets, made deals that reshaped industries, and his name carried weight in every room he entered. Yet, despite all his success, he rarely felt surprise, rarely felt anything. His days blended into each other, punctuated by meetings, phone calls, and decisions that shaped the lives of thousands. He rarely stopped to look at the world around him, except to calculate its potential. Even when invited to events that showcased art or culture, he attended more out of duty than interest. Music, painting, and performances felt distant to him, like parts of life meant for others, not someone who ran empires. This was why the invitation to the cultural event in the city felt routine. The city itself was bustling with life, with streets crowded and skyscrapers reflecting the sun in bright patterns. The event was meant to promote a cultural center, a space where artists could gather, perform, and grow. Most wealthy donors had already pledged, but a final decision was needed from him. He had made up his mind before even accepting the invitation. It would be a simple yes or no, and in his thinking, there was nothing more to consider. On the day of the event, he arrived in his black limousine, stepping out with a quiet confidence that demanded attention. The venue was grand, adorned with golden chandeliers and rich tapestries, yet it felt artificial to him. He was used to grandeur in the form of numbers and influence, not silk and decorations. Inside, the crowd clapped politely at speeches and introductions. The music played in the background, a string quartet, beautiful but distant. He sipped water politely, nodding at the right moments, yet his mind wandered to the next business deal he had to approve. He barely noticed the young performers who practiced quietly in a corner. To him, they were part of the background like decoration. He sat quietly, almost invisible among the crowd, though his presence was felt by all. People often watched him, curious about his reaction, hoping for approval or praise. But tonight he felt detached. He listened politely to the performers, but there was no spark. His mind, always calculating, assessed their technique, their posture, their timing, and then dismissed it. The music was pleasant, yet it stirred nothing. He had long ago stopped expecting that something could reach him in ways words or numbers could not. Meanwhile, the event continued with a series of carefully planned performances. Dancers twirled, singers performed, and every act was met with applause. Yet none of it penetrated the armor he had built over decades. He watched the faces of the audience around him, smiling and clapping, and wondered why they were moved. Why did they let themselves be affected by something as fleeting as a melody? For him, life was measured in results, in measurable change. Emotions were unreliable, messy. He had no time for them. After the scheduled performances, a quiet announcement was made. There was one more performer, someone who had not been noticed earlier. The room did not buzz with excitement. Instead, there were polite nods and some whispers. The billionaire hardly glanced in the direction of the performer. She was small, dressed simply, carrying herself with a calm, almost hesitant presence. She approached the piano at the far side of the room. No fanfare, no introduction, just a quiet presence. The audience watched politely, some glancing at their watches. The billionaire almost stood to leave, confident that this final act would be as unremarkable as the rest. He sat, arms folded, his eyes briefly following her movements. She seemed ordinary, fragile even, but there was something quiet in her demeanor that hinted at determination. Her fingers hovered over the keys, and the room held its breath in polite expectation. The billionaire, however, expected nothing. He had seen countless performers, judged them all, and knew that skill was often shallow. Art could be beautiful, but beauty rarely commanded change, rarely moved mountains. He had mountains to move. His life was mountains to move. As she began to play, the first notes were soft, almost hesitant. The sound filled the room in a way that was intimate, almost fragile. At first, he felt indifferent. Yet, there was a subtlety in her playing, a depth that could not be measured by technique alone. It was as if the music was carrying a story, a life lived in shadows, struggles, hopes, and dreams. The billionaire's attention, trained for focus and analysis, began to notice details. The delicate touch of her fingers, the pauses that carried meaning, the crescendos that spoke of hidden strength. The performance continued, growing richer and more complex. The audience leaned forward, some closing their eyes, drawn in by the honesty of the music. For the first time in many years, the billionaire felt a flicker of curiosity. He did not understand it, could not explain it, but the music seemed to reach parts of him long untouched. He felt a tug, subtle at first, then stronger, as if something inside him wanted to respond, to feel, to remember. Memories he had buried, childhood days, moments of wonder, times before ambition hardened, his heart began to surface. Unbidden, he realized that he was no longer merely listening to notes. He was hearing emotions, struggles, a life story told without words. It was not just skill. It was truth, raw and unpolished, touching parts of the soul that numbers, deals, and power could never reach. His chest tightened slightly, a sensation he had not experienced in decades. He shifted in his seat, his eyes fixed on the performer, noticing the intensity, quiet determination, and the way she poured herself into each key. There was a purity in her effort, a sincerity that transcended performance, and for the first time he questioned the boundaries he had placed around himself. The belief that control and logic alone defined worth. As the final notes lingered in the air, the room remained still. The audience, mesmerized, held their breath, afraid to break the spell. The billionaire sat quietly, the weight of what he had just heard pressing on him in ways he could not yet articulate. It was more than music. It was a confrontation with a part of himself he had long ignored. He did not clap immediately. He did not smile or nod. He just sat, absorbing, feeling, and wondering why this performance had made him pause in a way nothing else had. For decades, he had believed that decisions were final, that emotions were weaknesses to be suppressed. Yet here, in the dim light of the cultural hall, something challenged that belief. Something had entered his life uninvited, unexpected, and powerful. It was not the grandeur of wealth, the weight of power, or the strategy of business. It was something human, something delicate, yet undeniable. And it made him question the certainty he had clung to for so long as he left the hall that evening. The world outside felt different. The city streets, the lights, the sounds, they all seemed sharper, more vivid. He had arrived expecting routine, expecting a confirmation of his pre-decided choice. Instead, he had encountered something beyond calculation, something that touched him at the core. The performer, with her quiet presence and unwavering honesty, had done something no one else ever had. She made him pause, reflect, and feel. And though he did not yet know what he would decide, a seed had been planted. A seed that hinted at change, at reconsideration, at a possibility he had long denied himself. Tonight, for the first time in decades, he wondered if some things were more powerful than decisions, more lasting than control, and more profound than wealth. The next morning, the billionaire woke in his penthouse overlooking the city. The city was alive with movement, but he hardly noticed. His mind was not on contracts, numbers, or reports. It was on last night, on the music that had seeped into him and refused to leave. He had been trained to think in terms of logic, to separate emotion from action. But now he found himself caught between the two. For the first time, he realized that something as simple as a piano performance could unsettle a mind as calculated as his. The thought unsettled him, but it also fascinated him. He had breakfast in silence. the golden sun spilling over the city streets, and he could not focus. He remembered the quiet performer, the small figure at the piano, and the intensity with which she had played. He could still see her hands dancing across the keys, hear the rise and fall of each note, each one carrying an unspoken story. He tried to push it away, to return to his routines, but the memory refused. It was stubborn, unrelenting, and oddly comforting. He had never felt this way before, intrigued by something outside his sphere of power. By midday, he summoned his assistant and requested the schedule of all performers from the event. He wanted to know everything about her, where she came from, what she had done, and how she had reached that stage. The assistant, accustomed to his curiosity and sudden whims, hesitated only briefly before gathering the information. It turned out she was largely unknown, with no formal training, but had been performing in small venues and local events for years. Her talent was raw, unpolished, and undeniably real. That, the billionaire realized, was part of what had captivated him. It was not perfection. It was authenticity. The day stretched on, yet he found himself distracted by the thought of the performer. He replayed the music in his mind, imagining the subtle movements of her fingers, the way she had leaned into the keys, the emotion she had poured into every note. He felt a strange sense of connection, though he knew nothing about her life. He had always been a man who understood people through their power, influence or status, yet here was someone who had touched him without either. It was unsettling, and he could not ignore it. Late in the afternoon, he decided to visit the cultural center where the event had taken place. The building was modern, filled with light and quiet spaces for practice. He walked through the halls, observing students rehearsing, musicians practicing scales, and dancers perfecting their routines. The energy here was different from the corporate world he dominated. It was slower, more deliberate, and yet alive with purpose. He felt a subtle respect for it, though he did not yet understand why. It was a place where effort and passion mattered more than results. It challenged his worldview. Eventually, he found the piano room where she had performed. The grand instrument sat quietly in the center, polished and waiting. He approached it, his fingers hovering over the keys, but he did not play. He only listened to the echo of silence, imagining her hands moving, imagining the music filling the space. He realized that her presence had brought life to something ordinary. The piano had been a tool, but she had transformed it into a voice. That voice, he understood now, was what had unsettled him. It spoke of struggle, hope, and perseverance, all things he had rarely confronted in his own life. Over the next few days, he continued to learn about her. He discovered she had grown up with very little, practicing on old, worn-out instruments, learning by observing others, and teaching herself when no one could guide her. Every achievement had been earned, not handed down. Her life had been marked by perseverance and quiet courage. The billionaire, who had been raised in wealth and privilege, could not help but admire the resilience she embodied. It was raw, honest, and unfamiliar to him. He had always measured people by their success. But she had achieved something beyond status or recognition. She had touched souls. He decided to meet her personally. He arranged for a discreet introduction, wanting to see her not as a performer, but as a person. When she entered the room, she was calm, polite, and slightly apprehensive. She did not know the magnitude of his curiosity, nor did she need to. He observed her quietly, noting her posture, her eyes, and the quiet strength she carried. She was different from everyone he had met, and he found himself drawn not just to her talent, but to her character. There was a resilience in her that he recognized as rare and valuable. They spoke briefly, exchanging polite words. He did not speak of power, money, or deals. Instead, he asked her about her music, her inspirations, and her journey. She spoke simply, without exaggeration, revealing the challenges she had faced and the joy she found in performing. Her words were straightforward, yet full of meaning. He realized that her life, though small in the eyes of the world, had depth, courage, and purpose. She had carved out her own path, relying only on her skill and dedication. For the billionaire, who had always relied on strategy and influence, this was both humbling and inspiring. Over the next days, he watched her practice quietly from a distance, observing her commitment. She did not perform for him. She did not alter her playing to impress. She simply expressed herself, poured her heart into the music, and allowed the piano to become a part of her. The billionaire noticed how she struggled with difficult passages, how she paused to correct herself, and how she smiled quietly when she succeeded. He was struck by her humanity, the imperfections, the effort, and the relentless pursuit of expression. It was so different from the polished, calculated efforts he was accustomed to seeing in the world around him. During these observations, he began to reflect on his own life. He thought about the decisions he had made, the paths he had chosen, and the walls he had built around himself. He realized that, despite his power, he had lived cautiously, avoiding vulnerability and emotion. He had achieved much, but there were parts of him untouched by beauty, by struggle, by connection. The performer had reminded him of those parts, showing him a world beyond numbers and influence. It was unsettling, but it also felt necessary. He could not ignore the lesson she had unwittingly given him. One evening, as she practiced, he finally allowed himself to speak more freely. He asked her about her dreams, not the practical ones, but the ones she held secretly in her heart. She spoke softly of places she wanted to perform, pieces she wanted to master, and audiences she wanted to touch. Her ambitions were modest, yet profound, grounded in passion rather than recognition. The billionaire realized that her goals were fueled by love and dedication, not necessity or wealth. He found himself thinking deeply about the difference between living for survival, for power, or for passion. He stayed longer than he had planned, listening to the music, absorbing the quiet intensity of her dedication, and reflecting on his own life. He felt emotions he had long suppressed: admiration, curiosity, even a sense of longing. For the first time in years, he felt that life could be more than strategy, more than control, more than results. It could be lived with intention, vulnerability, and passion. And he knew that this realization had come from a single source: the quiet, unnoticed performer who had changed the energy of a room with nothing but honesty and skill. The billionaire left the center that night with a heavy mind and a restless heart. He had come expecting routine, expecting to confirm his pre-decided decision. Instead, he had encountered a force that was unquantifiable, unpredictable, and profoundly moving. It had challenged his beliefs, stirred emotions he had ignored, and opened his mind to possibilities he had long dismissed. He realized that the performer's music was more than entertainment. It was a mirror, reflecting what he had lost and what he could still regain. And for the first time, began to wonder if perhaps some decisions deserved reconsideration. Days passed, yet the memory of the piano performance remained vivid in the billionaire's mind. He could not escape it, no matter how busy he became with meetings and calls. The music played over and over in his thoughts, each note stirring feelings he had long ignored. He realized that this was not just curiosity. It was something deeper, a connection he did not understand but could not ignore. He found himself reflecting on his own life, the choices he had made, and the walls he had built around himself. For the first time, he questioned whether his success had come at the cost of his own humanity. He returned to the cultural center several times, watching the performer practice. Each session revealed more about her determination and passion. She did not play to impress. She played to express, to communicate something beyond words. The billionaire observed the subtle tension in her shoulders as she faced difficult passages, the quiet sigh when she made a mistake, and the serene smile when she achieved something she had been struggling with. These small details fascinated him, and he began to see the world through a lens he had almost forgotten existed, one that valued effort, authenticity, and emotion. One afternoon, he decided to speak with her in depth. They sat in a quiet corner of the practice room, away from other students and instruments. He asked her about the challenges she had faced, not just in music, but in life. She spoke candidly, sharing the hardships of growing up with little, times she had failed, and the moments she had almost given up. Her voice was calm but strong, filled with resilience that left him in awe. He realized that her life, though difficult, had shaped her into someone who could inspire without words. someone whose presence alone could alter the energy of a room. The billionaire felt a strange mix of emotions, respect, and an unexpected sense of humility. He had always been in control, shaping his surroundings and the people in them. Yet here was someone who needed no control, who commanded attention through sheer authenticity. He felt a quiet jealousy of her freedom, the freedom to be herself, without fear of judgment or consequence. For decades, he had measured life in terms of influence, results, and power. Now he saw a different kind of strength, one that could not be bought or calculated. As the days went by, he began to notice the impact of her music on others. Students who practiced alongside her were inspired, their performances improving simply by being near her dedication. Teachers spoke of her determination, yet she never boasted or sought recognition. The billionaire saw the ripple effect of her presence, how authenticity could influence a room far more than authority or wealth. He began to reconsider his own approach to leadership and influence. Perhaps there was more to impact than strategy and decision-making. Perhaps inspiration and sincerity held a power he had overlooked one evening. After a particularly moving practice session, the performer spoke about her dreams. She wished to share her music with people beyond her city, to touch lives in ways that went beyond applause or fame. The billionaire listened intently, struck by the purity of her intentions. Unlike most people he encountered, she sought no advantage, no material gain. She wanted only to connect, to communicate through music. He realized that this was what had unsettled him the first night. The music had spoken truths he had long ignored. Truths about the human experience, emotion, and the value of vulnerability. That night, he sat alone in his office, thinking deeply. He reflected on his own life, the decisions he had made, and the emotional distance he had maintained. He thought of the people he had influenced, the deals he had closed, and the power he had wielded. And he felt a subtle emptiness. He had achieved much, yet he realized that true fulfillment had always eluded him. The performer had reminded him of something vital, something that could not be measured in money, influence, or status. It was the simple yet profound ability to touch hearts, to be present, and to feel deeply. The billionaire decided to take action. He wanted to understand more, not just about her music, but about the human impact of art and passion. He arranged meetings with cultural experts, musicians, and educators to learn how talent could be nurtured and supported. Each conversation reinforced what he had already sensed, that true potential often went unnoticed, and that guidance, encouragement, and recognition could transform lives. He felt a sense of purpose he had not experienced in years. It was not about power or wealth. It was about fostering growth, inspiring others, and valuing what could not be quantified. In the following days, he observed the performer closely, noticing how she interacted with others. She was kind, humble, and focused. She lifted others without seeking attention, offered guidance without judgment, and maintained a quiet confidence that inspired trust. The billionaire realized that her influence extended far beyond the piano. She was a catalyst for growth, resilience, and hope. He found himself reflecting on his own interactions, recognizing the ways he could emulate these qualities to become not just a powerful man, but a meaningful one. He also reflected on the contrast between his life and hers. He had been given resources, guidance, and opportunities from the start. She had created her path through determination, perseverance, and unwavering focus. Yet, despite their different circumstances, he felt a profound connection to her journey. It reminded him of the human capacity to overcome, to create meaning, and to touch others, regardless of background. The realization humbled him, and he felt a subtle but undeniable shift within himself, willingness to consider that his way of measuring life might be incomplete. The billionaire began to engage with her in more meaningful conversations. He asked about her inspirations, her failures, and her vision for the future. She spoke with honesty, sharing her experiences without exaggeration or self-pity. Her words carried weight because they were authentic. He found himself drawn not only to her music, but to her character, her resilience, and her unwavering dedication. It was a reminder that true strength often came quietly, without fanfare, and that impact was measured in more than achievements. It was measured in the lives touched, the hope instilled, and the courage inspired. One afternoon, as he listened to her practice, a particularly complex piece, he felt something he had not experienced in years: vulnerability. The music spoke directly to parts of him he had long ignored. It brought back memories of his own youth, of dreams he had abandoned, and of emotions he had suppressed. He realized that he had been living a life of control and calculation. Yet this had left parts of him untouched, untested, and unfulfilled. Her music had opened a door he did not know existed, inviting him to explore feelings and possibilities beyond logic and strategy. He spent the evening in contemplation, reflecting on the profound effect of a single human being on his life. The performer, through her music, had challenged his worldview, questioned his assumptions, and reminded him of the human experiences he had long neglected. It was a quiet revelation, one that would shape his decisions, his interactions, and perhaps even his legacy. He recognized that true influence was not only about power or control, but about the ability to inspire, to connect, and to awaken parts of the human spirit that are often overlooked. As night fell, he sat by his window, looking out over the city lights. The world seemed different, somehow richer and more complex. He understood that the performer's music had done more than entertain. It had transformed his perception, revealing a depth of experience he had forgotten. He felt a sense of anticipation, a curiosity about what could come next, and a quiet determination to explore these newfound insights. For the first time in a long while, he felt that life could be more than strategy, more than control, and more than success measured in numbers. It could be felt, experienced, and shared in ways that transcended his previous understanding. In the coming days, he continued to immerse himself in her world, learning from her approach to music and life. Each interaction reinforced the lessons he had begun to understand: the value of authenticity, the power of perseverance, and the profound impact of connecting with others on a human level. He found himself thinking not only about her future, but about his own. Perhaps there were choices to reconsider, paths to explore, and moments to embrace that he had once dismissed. The quiet, deliberate presence of the performer had opened a door, and he was willing, for the first time, to step through it. The days that followed were filled with reflection. The billionaire could not shake the thought of the performer, her music, or the feelings it had stirred in him. It was as though a quiet voice inside him had awakened, asking questions he had long ignored. Questions about meaning, about purpose, and about the kind of life he wanted to lead. For decades, he had relied on control, calculation, and certainty. Here was evidence that the unexpected could be transformative. He felt unsettled, yet alive in a way he had forgotten was possible. He spent hours walking through the city's streets, observing people, listening to sounds, and noticing small moments that had previously gone unnoticed. He saw the joy in a child's laughter, the dedication of street performers, the quiet efforts of people working tirelessly without recognition. Each observation reminded him of the performer's authenticity, her resilience, and the impact one person could have simply by being true to themselves. He began to understand that influence was not always measured in power or wealth, but in presence and authenticity. This realization stirred something deep within him, an urge to act differently, to reconsider choices he had long thought fixed. Returning to the cultural center, he found the performer practicing alone. The room was quiet, the piano waiting, and she seemed unaware of his presence. He watched as she played, noticing the intensity and focus in her movements. Every note seemed deliberate, every pause intentional, and every crescendo carried emotion beyond technique. He realized that her skill was not just in playing, but in communicating something profound without words. He felt a deep admiration for her ability to convey life's complexities through music. It was as if she had unlocked a part of reality he had never been able to reach. He approached her quietly after the practice, and they spoke at length. He asked questions not about her performances, but about her life, her experiences, and the choices she had made. She spoke openly, revealing the obstacles she had faced, the moments she had doubted herself, and the determination that had carried her forward. Her honesty was disarming, and he felt a growing respect for her courage. It was clear that her strength did not come from external recognition or wealth, but from an internal commitment to her craft and her truth. He realized that such strength was rare, and he had underestimated its power. Over the following days, he began to reflect on his own life in a new light. He thought about the decisions he had made, the relationships he had neglected, and the moments he had prioritized efficiency over meaning. He realized that he had built walls to protect himself, walls that had kept out vulnerability, emotion, and connection. The performer's music had penetrated those walls, reaching a part of him that had been dormant for years. He felt a mix of awe, humility, and longing. For the first time, he questioned whether the life he had, meticulously constructed, was truly fulfilling. He also began to consider the impact of supporting others in meaningful ways. He had often funded projects for status or recognition, but he realized that true support required more than money. It required belief, encouragement, and understanding. He thought about the cultural center and the role it could play in nurturing talent like hers. He envisioned a space where passion, dedication, and authenticity were valued above recognition and reward. He understood that investing in such potential could create ripples far beyond immediate outcomes. It was not about power. It was about impact in its purest form. He arranged for meetings with the staff at the Cultural Center to understand their needs, challenges, and visions for the future. He listened more than he spoke, absorbing the insights of teachers, mentors, and young performers. Their dedication and passion reminded him of the performer, and he recognized that support for their work could transform lives. He felt a renewed sense of purpose, a desire to use his resources not merely for status, but for genuine impact. Each conversation reinforced the importance of authenticity, perseverance, and encouragement in fostering meaningful growth. Meanwhile, he continued to spend time with the performer, observing her interactions with others and noting the subtle ways she influenced those around her. She inspired without trying, uplifted without demanding, and led by example. He recognized that leadership could take many forms, and that influence was most profound when it was earned through integrity and authenticity rather than imposed through authority. He began to consider how he could incorporate these principles into his own life and work. The lessons were quiet, yet powerful, and they challenged everything he had previously believed about control, success, and fulfillment. One evening, after a long day of observation and reflection, he invited the performer to perform privately in a small room within the cultural center. She was initially hesitant, but he assured her it was not for evaluation, nor for prestige. It was simply an opportunity for him to understand the depth of her craft and the stories her music conveyed. As she played, he felt the emotional weight of every note, the sincerity of every pause, and the quiet strength of every crescendo. It was as if the room itself was alive with the emotions she expressed, and he felt a profound connection to the human experience she communicated. He realized that this music was more than performance. It was communication, storytelling, and emotional truth. It had the power to transform perspectives, awaken empathy, and inspire action. For the first time, he understood that his previous measures of success, wealth, influence, and control were incomplete. True impact was measured not only by what one could achieve, but by the depth of connection one could foster in the lives one could touch. The performer had demonstrated this effortlessly, and he felt a deep gratitude for the lessons she had unknowingly imparted as days turned into weeks. He made the decision to engage more actively with the cultural center. He offered support not just financially, but strategically, seeking ways to empower teachers, students, and performers. He recognized that nurturing talent required more than funding. It required mentorship, encouragement, and belief in the potential of others. He found himself invigorated by this new purpose, sense of fulfillment that he had never experienced in the boardrooms of his empire. It was quiet work, unglamorous and subtle, yet it resonated deeply within him. The performer, too, began to notice the change. She appreciated his sincerity, his willingness to learn, and his genuine interest in the work being done at the center. She saw that his presence was not about authority, but about support and encouragement. Their interactions became a mutual exchange of insights, inspiration, and respect. He learned from her authenticity, while she learned from his resources and guidance. Together they began to explore how talent, passion, perseverance could be nurtured to create lasting impact. One afternoon, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. He had entered the cultural center expecting routine, expecting to confirm a pre-decided choice. Instead, he had encountered a force beyond control, beyond calculation, and beyond expectation. The performer had challenged his assumptions, stirred emotions he had long ignored, and revealed a path toward meaning and connection he had never considered. He understood that transformation often begins quietly, with small moments of honesty, courage, and authenticity. He felt a renewed commitment to act differently, to lead with empathy, and to value human impact above status or recognition. He recognized that his influence could be wielded not only through power and wealth, but through the careful cultivation of opportunity, encouragement, and inspiration. The lessons were subtle, yet profound, and he felt a responsibility to integrate them into his life. For the first time, he felt that true success was not defined solely by outcomes, but by the lives touched, the hope inspired, and the potential nurtured as night fell. He stood by the window of the cultural center, looking out at the quiet streets below. The city lights reflected the energy, determination, and potential of countless lives, each with its own story, struggles, and dreams. He felt a profound connection to this web of human experience, recognizing that his role was not merely to command, but to support, nurture, and inspire. The performer's music had opened a door, and he was determined to walk through it, embracing the lessons of authenticity, perseverance, and impact. It was a path he had not expected, but one that promised meaning, fulfillment, and transformation. The day of the final decision arrived, and the billionaire felt an unusual tension in his chest. For decades, he had prided himself on certainty, on decisiveness that never wavered. Yet now, standing at the edge of a choice that seemed small to the world, but immense to him, he felt the weight of reflection, emotion, and consideration pressing upon him. The cultural center, the performers, and especially the quiet pianist had shifted his perspective. And he realized that this decision was about more than money or approval. It was about impact, recognition of human effort, and the courage to change. He arrived at the cultural center early, walking through the halls that had become familiar over the past weeks. He noticed the young musicians rehearsing, the teachers mentoring, and the spaces filled with quiet energy and dedication. It was different from anything he had known in the corporate world. Here, success was not measured by profit margins or contracts, but by growth, effort, and the small victories that came from persistence. He felt a deep respect for the environment and the people who worked tirelessly to nurture talent. He realized that the decision he was about to make would ripple through this world in ways he could only begin to imagine. The performer was already there, practicing softly at the piano in an empty room. She looked up as he entered, her expression polite and calm, unaware of the inner struggle he faced. He watched her for a moment, noting the quiet intensity in her eyes, the grace in her movements, and the honesty in her playing. He remembered the first night he had seen her perform, the emotions that had stirred within him, and the lessons he had learned about authenticity, perseverance, and impact. Her presence had changed him, and now it was time for him to respond in a way that reflected that change. He approached her quietly and asked if she would play one more piece. She nodded and began to play, her fingers moving with precision and emotion. The music filled the room, resonating in ways that went beyond sound. It carried the weight of her life, her struggles, her triumphs, and her dedication. Each note spoke directly to him, reminding him of the lessons he had learned, the reflections he had had, and the transformation he had experienced. He felt tears welling in his eyes, a rare acknowledgement of the depth of feeling she had awakened within him. As the final note lingered in the air, he took a deep breath and spoke, his voice calm but filled with sincerity. He expressed his admiration for her talent, her dedication, and the impact she had on everyone around her. He spoke of the importance of supporting authenticity, effort, and perseverance, and how these values could shape the lives of many. His words were not formal or calculated. They were honest, coming from a place of genuine respect and reflection. She listened quietly, her eyes meeting his, and for a moment, the world outside the room seemed to fade away. He then addressed the staff and the performers gathered in the room. Explaining that he had reconsidered his initial decision, he announced that he would provide full support for the Cultural Center, funding not only the existing programs, but also new initiatives to nurture talent, provide mentorship, and expand opportunities for those with potential. The room was silent for a moment, and then a wave of emotion swept through the audience. Teachers, students, and performers felt the impact of his decision, not just as financial support, but as recognition of the value of their work and dedication. He explained that the decision was inspired by one person, a performer who had shown that authenticity, dedication, and courage could move hearts and transform perspectives. He emphasized that true influence came not from power or control, but from the ability to inspire, uplift, and recognize the potential in others. His words were met with a mixture of surprise, gratitude, and admiration. The impact was immediate and profound, a testament to the lessons he had learned and the transformation he had undergone. The performer, though still modest, allowed herself a small smile. She had not sought recognition, but she understood the significance of what had occurred. The billionaire had acknowledged not only her talent, but also the deeper values her music represented. He had embraced the possibility of change, demonstrated the courage to reconsider, and used his influence to create a meaningful impact. The room felt alive with hope, inspiration, and a renewed sense of purpose. It was a moment that none present would forget. In the days that followed, the Cultural Center flourished. New programs were established, mentorship initiatives began, and young performers found guidance and encouragement. The billionaire continued to visit, not as a distant benefactor, but as an engaged supporter, observing, listening, and learning. He found fulfillment in this new role, a quiet satisfaction that surpassed anything he had experienced in the boardrooms of his empire. The center became a beacon of growth, opportunity, and inspiration, a tangible reflection of the lessons he had learned through one piano performance.